This is Special Prosecutor Larry Klayman.
I'm the only lawyer ever to obtain a court ruling that a president of the United States committed a crime.
For truth. For competition.
As a young lawyer, I helped break up AT&T. That's why you have all your cell phones today.
For sovereignty. For the Republic.
I'm the guy who, at Judicial Watch, which I founded, uncovered the Chinagate scandal. Millions of dollars going to the Clinton campaign, corrupting our political system.
For the privacy of citizens.
And I'm the only guy to have enjoined the National Security Agency from mass surveillance on hundreds of millions of Americans.
Tearing it up.
I'm the son of meat packers in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I know how to slice and dice.
Bringing it back.
We're going to take this country apart and put it back together again in the way envisioned by our founding fathers.
It's not just talk.
We're not just regurgitating news stories. Larry Klayman, special prosecutor, is making the news.
And now, here's Larry.
Welcome to this week's edition of Special Prosecutor with Larry Klayman. We have a particularly hard-hitting show today. Former Congressman Bob Barr, former U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Virginia, the only congressman I could ever trust, the only person in Congress in all the years that I've been doing public interest work, first at Judicial Watch and now at Freedom Watch, I could ever trust, someone who was part of the great right-wing conspiracy, as Hillary Clinton put it, and submitted articles of impeachment, which led to the impeachment of Bill Clinton. Of course, we were let down in the U.S. Senate. The Republicans there took a dive, and we know what happened. Clinton came back. His wife came back, Hillary. She ran for the presidency, and she's not done yet, of course. She's out complaining why she lost, doesn't really recognize that she's the reason that she lost, and people can't stand her anymore. In fact, even just in the last few days, the Huffington Post, an extreme left-wing publication, basically told her from the left, get lost, you're done, you're a loser. But let's talk about something that's more important right now, because Hillary Clinton is past history in terms of her political future. She's just an annoyance to everyone at this point in time. It's the wiretaps that we heard about going on this week, not just with regard to President Trump, Supreme Court justices, 156 judges, Trump when he was a businessman, his colleagues, his family, but something that was current. And this is during the campaign. The campaign manager of Donald Trump, Paul Manafort, formerly of the consulting firm of Black, Manafort, Stone, and Kelly, they invented the concept of getting presidents elected on the Republican side and then lobbying them for profit, obviously. And apparently Manafort was wiretapped by either the FBI, the NSA, or the CIA. Probably the NSA and the CIA. Appears to be a Section 702 FISA warrant, which is when you're having communications overseas. But it may also be broader than that, where telephone communications with the President of the United States, he was campaign manager, were actually being intercepted by Obama intelligence agencies, James Comey, who was running the FBI at the time as its director, and other entities. James Clapper, who was the director of national intelligence. All of these highly corrupt individuals were, in fact, conducting a super Watergate. Now, if you think Watergate was something, which was basically a two-bit break-in across the street from Howard Johnson's Motor Lodge and Restaurant in Washington, D.C., at the Watergate, where Nixon was already many, many points up in the polls, I think somewhere between 18 and 22% with regard to George McGovern. And who knows what they got. People to this day don't know what they got out of the Democratic National Committee when they broke in. But can you imagine wiretapping the campaign manager of President-to-be Donald Trump and gathering confidential conversations by a Democrat administration, an administration run by Barack Obama? He is the chief executive officer. He sits over the FBI. He sits over the NSA. He sits over the CIA. This is beyond imagination. This has never happened in American history. And now we know that it actually did happen. Now, whether or not Manafort did anything wrong or was in the act of committing a crime, and we don't know that. In fact, given the activities of Robert Mueller, who now is investigating this matter, it would appear that he's trying to trump things up, but we don't know, no pun intended. But even if that weren't the case, wouldn't the FBI or these intelligence agencies or anyone let the president-to-be know, the candidate know, that, in fact, there's a wiretap that's going on against him, if the reason for this was Manafort's communications with the Russians, the Ukrainians, or anyone else? Now, obviously, this was done surreptitiously. It was done secretively. It was an insurance policy, kind of what Nixon did, back during Watergate, pre-Watergate, to make sure that Hillary would win and that the Democrats would stay in control. It looked like Hillary to everybody at that time, except those people who really knew the feelings of the American people, would probably win. So you have to ask yourself, why was it done? Because they wanted to slam dunk it. They wanted to make sure that they had dirt on Trump that they could use if they had to, if things went south in the final days of the electoral process. Now, what's important about this? Our client and whistleblower at Freedom Watch, and you go to freedomwatchusa.org, freedomwatchusa.org, Dennis Montgomery came forward a few years ago. I got him immunity to come forward to the FBI, to Comey's FBI. We were working with his general counsel, Comey's general counsel, James Baker, who has now been disclosed as under criminal investigation himself for allegedly leaking information improperly with regard to FBI activities and perhaps other matters. But Dennis Montgomery came forward with 47 hard drives, 600 million pages of information. He's been on this show before. I don't let him say much because a lot of it's classified, and I've never even seen it. We gave it all to the FBI. We gave it to Comey. And Montgomery obviously had the goods on everybody, on James Clapper, who he worked closely with. Montgomery was an NSA CIA contractor who knew that they were doing this illegal surveillance. And he also worked with people like Comey at the FBI. Before that, Mueller. So all of these people are dirty, and now it's coming out. All the stuff is coming out in the wash, and now we know that what Montgomery has said has been completely true. I knew that. Montgomery knew that. But I'll tell you something. I spent 2 to 3 months earlier this year going around Capitol Hill, hand-to-hand, hand-to-hand combat, so to speak, like a 30-year-old lawyer going from office to office, first talking to the House Judiciary Committee. I went to Steve King. I told him about it. He's on the House Judiciary Committee. He's number 2 majority member. And then Bob Goodlatte's office, I spoke with Bob. He's the chairman. And I told him what Montgomery had. Because what's really important, at least with regard to the Judiciary Committee, is that they've been surveilling Supreme Court justices like the Chief Justice, 156 judges. You would think that the Judiciary Committee would have a problem with that and want to investigate. But no, nothing was ever heard from them. Then I went to the House Intelligence Committee, run by Devin Nunes. Did the same thing. And you would think that the intelligence committees on Capitol Hill, who are supposed to oversee the intelligence agencies, would want to know if illegality, unconstitutional behavior was afoot. Nothing from them. Just a lot of talk, appearances on Fox News and other cable networks so they can get themselves reelected, but that was it. Then I went to the Senate Judiciary Committee, run by Chairman Charles Grassley, who in the past has been thought to be a fairly honest and open guy. But, I went to him earlier with Dennis Montgomery, and they basically gave us the back of the hand. They said, go to the Obama Defense Department and tell it to the Inspector General. Well, that was like going into the devil's lair. So then that's what caused us to go to Comey with the help of Judge Royce Lamberth of the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia, who knew James Baker. And that's how we took Montgomery to Comey. Montgomery also gave an interview under oath for 3 hours to FBI special agents in a secure room of the D.C. District Office in Washington, D.C. Well, it's not just Grassley. I mean, I know several of his aides. I'm not going to name names because in the past they've been my friends, but I'm not so sure anymore that they're the friends of the American people. But we also approached Senator Orrin Hatch, who sits on that committee. I actually engaged Grassley walking across the mall a few months ago, and I explained this to him, and I had to tell it 2 or 3 times to him. Grassley's getting kind of old. I think he's kind of senile at this point. Actually, he's been investigating Trump rather than investigating this in the last month or so. I think he's really off the reservation, and he's completely ineffective. And frankly, he should step down as the chairman. He's just over the hill, I'm afraid. Didn't hear anything back from the Senate Judiciary Committee. And then, of course, there was the Senate Intelligence Committee run by Chairman Richard Burr, who has his hands all over Mark Warner on the committee, the ranking minority member. I don't know. It looks like they have some kind of a relationship. It's bizarre. I've never seen anything like it. I've sat in committee hearings. They're like best friends. And it's ridiculous. And they're investigating Trump, but not getting into this either. Now, why is that? Why is it that Congress is not doing its job? Of course, it doesn't do its job in virtually anything that it does, basically just goes around shaking down lobbyists for money. That's the modus operandi on Capitol Hill, wearing their Senate pins and their House pins and their $3,000 suits, never paying for a meal. I've never seen a congressman or senator ever take money out of his wallet. And it's a really sad thing. But why is that? Because the intelligence committees know, and the judiciary committees know, the ranking members and others, that these intelligence agencies and the FBI have the goods on them. Capitol Hill's like Sodom and Gomorrah. You wouldn't believe the conduct that goes on up there. And I don't want to get into it, but they probably feel that if they investigate what's been going on, the dirt about them will be disclosed, ruining their personal lives and their professional lives. I've said this many times. But this is what I have done at Freedom Watch. We filed complaints. We're in court. Montgomery and I filed a complaint. We're in front of Judge Richard Leon. Go to our website at freedomwatchusa.org. Please contribute to our cause. We are your Justice Department. The Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, has put his head in the sand. He's afraid of his shadow because he's under investigation, too, for connections with the Russians. He's worried that if he pushes too hard, that something will happen to him and he might lose his job. And this is what it's like on Capitol Hill, and it's what it's like in all branches of government, with the exception of the president. He's the only one that has any courage. But the rest of them, frankly, are acting in a very traitorous way to this country. So please go to freedomwatchusa.org. We need your contributions. We need to ramp up. We need to be your Justice Department. I'm your special counsel. You know that, special prosecutor, not your special counsel. I don't want to be like Mueller, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But please go there and see what we're doing. Look at this case. We need your help. God bless you, and we'll be right back.
Special Prosecutor Larry Klayman.
Investigating and exposing corrupt organizations, institutions, judges, and politicians. Special Prosecutor serves as the voice of citizens across the country. Citizens that want the stories of corruption brought to light and those held responsible brought to justice. Special Prosecutor Larry Klayman.
Dangerous.
You don't hear, use the court and the law.
Lethal.
This is bad.
Special Prosecutor
Very bad.
Larry Klayman.
If you'd like to support Freedom Watch and this radio show, go to freedomwatchusa.org.
Now let's talk about the leaks that are coming out of the special counsel, Robert Mueller, former FBI director, someone who himself engaged in illegal surveillance. Frankly, the man's a criminal. And you can see that with his investigation right now, because he's been leaking bigger than a sieve. Every day, 2 or 3 reports of what his prosecutors are doing. And, of course, those prosecutors, 50% of them at least, were big supporters of Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. They gave money to their campaigns. They're out to get the president and the people around the president. There's no doubt. You don't hire people like this for large salaries, have them leave their law firms or other areas of practice. There's now 17 of them, if you can believe that, at our expense, taxpayer expense, unless you intend a certain result. And the result is, let's destroy the presidency of Donald Trump. Of course, we know that Mueller is the friend of James Comey. Mueller is someone who was very good at playing both sides of the street. That's how he got to be FBI director. Frankly, he's a corrupt individual, and I'll say that straight up, and it needs to be said. Unfortunately, the president's lawyers are too kind with him. They don't push hard enough. The president needs to get lawyers outside of Washington that aren't part of the club, and I've said that. But what we did this week, and we were the only ones that have ever done this at Freedom Watch, go to freedomwatchusa.org. We filed complaints, as I said we were going to do last week, with the Inspector General of the Justice Department, with the Office of Professional Responsibility of the Justice Department, and with the 2 judges in the Eastern District of Virginia and in the District of Columbia who are overseeing the grand jury proceedings which have been commenced by Robert Mueller and his hack, biased, prejudiced staff. Now, what we said was all these leaks can't occur legally. They're coming out minute by minute. There's grand jury secrecy rules. It's called Rule 6E of the Rules of Criminal Procedure. And this needs to be investigated. Mueller needs to be removed as special counsel. And, in fact, it should be referred for prosecution. So that's what we did. Now, we're waiting for a response. We're going to keep pushing. But we've also gone to Attorney General Jeff Sessions, who I've communicated with in the past. And, he's a very nice man. He's very gentlemanly, but he's afraid of his shadow. And I've written a lot about that, and you can see those columns at freedomwatchusa.org. You can see them on various other websites, WND.com, Newsmax.com, others where I write. I'll be writing something today about the wiretaps. You can look for it. But this is an untenable situation. It's never been like this before in the history of prosecution, that all this stuff is coming out, and the fact that it's coming out is intended to, even if there are no indictments, and there will be indictments for sure. Manafort has already been told he's going to be indicted. That's the president's former campaign manager. That's like indicting Trump himself, and they may get to that. But all of this is intended to damage the presidency, even if nothing ever happened in the end. In other words, it is a hit on the president of the United States. And of course, now that we have these crises with North Korea on the horizon, with Iran, we have health care that's trying to be corrected with a repeal of Obamacare. We have tax reform. We have all kinds of things. This is a calculated effort by Mueller and his hack prosecutors to immobilize the president of the United States so he can't fulfill the agenda that the American people voted for. And that is what's terrible. But again, who had to do this? Larry Klayman, your special prosecutor, and Freedom Watch. No one else did this. Not even my former group, Judicial Watch. They file Freedom of Information Act requests to get documents. But you know what? That's nice. You get to go on all these cable networks and talk about it and pound your chest and say we're the greatest thing since sliced bread. But what are you going to do about that? It's Freedom Watch that actually brings hard-hitting cases, whether it's that or whether it's against Antifa, against Black Lives Matter, against Al Sharp and Farrakhan, other types of cases that seek justice. Hillary Clinton, our Benghazi case for being responsible for the death of Ty Woods and Shorn Smith, who died with the ambassador. You need a Justice Department, and unfortunately, we're the only one that's out there. Documents only go so far. So here's what you need to do. Go to our website at freedomwatchusa.org. Sign up for what we have to do. Sign up to know what we're doing. Join our cause. Listen to this show. Send this show around to your friends, because education is extremely important. And it's not just donating to Freedom Watch that counts. It's getting the American people up to speed on what's really going on. And as I've said many times in the introduction to this show, we just don't regurgitate the news. We make the news. And that's the difference between this show and everybody else. Everybody else is looking at this from the outside. We're looking at it from the inside. We're in the trenches. We're down at street level. We're not afraid. We do what we think is right. We're not Jeff Sessions. We don't put our head in the sand. We are Freedom Watch, and we're proud of that. I'll be right back, and we're going to have Congressman Bob Barr with us, and that's going to be important to listen to.
And now, 4 words that make corrupt politicians make wee-wee in their little pants.
Transparency and the rule of law will be the touchstones of this presidency.
But we have to pass the bill so that you can find out what is in it.
Special Prosecutor Larry Klayman.
Be the one who makes our country great again. Go to freedomwatchusa.org and donate.
I have on the line now Bob Barr, former congressman from Georgia, former U.S. attorney for the Northern District of Georgia, someone who over the many years since I've known him has become my really good friend, someone who I trust. I've said this before. Bob is the only one in Congress that I could ever depend on in my 40 years of practice, frankly. The rest of them, look sideways. Or if they don't look sideways and they're looking at you, they'll tell you one thing and then do the next. But Bob actually put it on the line when he introduced articles of impeachment against Bill Clinton. And, of course, he wanted to go broader than Lewinsky, and he wanted to get into the bribes that were being taken from China by the Clintons, Travelgate, Filegate, all the different scandals. There were 40 of them. And Bob actually introduced an impeachment report of Judicial Watch when I was running Judicial Watch. Of course, I'm the founder. Now I run Freedom Watch. He introduced that in Congress. It's actually part of the congressional record. And he's a courageous man. And I really value his advice. I value his insight into various matters. And that's why I asked him to come on today, because we have a situation now with regard to what we've learned, that the campaign manager of President Trump at the time that he was running for the presidency of the United States was being wiretapped. Now, if you're wiretapping the campaign manager, you're wiretapping the president of the United States. Obviously, the president has to be in constant contact. And we remember what happened back in the early 70s when Richard Nixon's men, so to speak, broke into the Watergate, which compared to this was child's play. This is a super Watergate. And it appears, as I've said earlier in the show, that what they were doing, the Obama administration, with obviously the collusion, use the word collusion, that's a good one, of Hillary Clinton and her staff, was to have an insurance policy, to have dirt on Trump just in case things went south right before the election. Of course, that's what Richard Nixon was seeking, obviously, with breaking into the Watergate. He was up, tens of points against George McGovern at the time, running for president. But, yeah, he wanted a little insurance, okay, that in case things went the other way, he would have the goods on McGovern. Didn't take much to beat McGovern, though, I got to tell you. But, Bob, I want to bring you into this because with your insight, and, we're basically about the same age. You have a great knowledge of American history, of justice. You're a U.S. attorney. So I wanted to get your thoughts for our listeners about current state of affairs.
Well, it's always great to be with you, Larry, and your many listeners, and thank you so much for the very kind introductory remarks. I could echo those back to you with all sincerity in terms of you when you headed Judicial Watch, and certainly continue in your new capacity today. But you were one of the very, very few folks not in government on whom I could depend to work with me and bring me information and evidence that was backed up, that was objective, that was true, and relevant to the issue. So I have always appreciated and valued that, not only the work that we did together while I was in the Congress, but since then and the work that you're engaged in now. With regard to the issue that you just identified here, it's extremely serious and stands for a couple of principles that you and I, and I'm sure your listeners, are very familiar with. One is that there are certain things about government that never change, regardless of which party, which individuals, what office we're talking about, that never change. And we're seeing that today. Your comparison to Watergate and the Mueller investigations as they're going on now illustrate to us that government, if allowed to, will abuse its power. And government, if allowed to, will completely ignore the fundamentally important safeguards that were built into our Constitution, particularly through the Bill of Rights. So that's lesson number one that needs to be kept in mind, that no matter the time or the individuals or entities, government will always seek to gain more power and to abuse the power that it has. Secondly, as you've alluded to, that makes this current case far worse than Watergate, is simply the technology that is now available to the government that was not available 2 generations ago in Watergate. The government nowadays doesn't need to really worry so much about breaking and entering because of the technology that it can rely on. But wait a minute, they did break and enter. So what we see is a confluence of old technology used to abuse the power of government hand in hand with the new powers that government has since the 1960s to use computers, to gain information, to access information, and to retain and database that information. And you're absolutely correct that in using Paul Manafort as a means to get into the Trump campaign, and even after the campaign, when Donald Trump was the president-elect of the United States, this was still going on. I mean, it is utterly and absolutely frightening what we're witnessing here, Larry, and it's very, very good that you're focusing on this.
Well, Bob, we also see the leaks coming out of Special Prosecutor, that's me, of course, Special Counsel Robert Mueller, coming out of his grand jury proceedings. You were the U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Georgia is this kosher, so to speak? Of course, we're in the Jewish holidays, so we can use the word kosher with that. But what's your thought on all these leaks that are coming out daily? I mean, there's 2 or 3 leaks about what Mueller's doing. I mean, there's nothing he's doing that we don't know.
It's always been a problem maintaining the secrecy of grand jury proceedings insofar as the government is able. As you know, witnesses, certainly if they appear before a grand jury, you can't control them when they go back out. But what you can control as the government is to ensure that your employees, your lawyers, your staff people that are working with you, whether it's in the Department of Justice formally or whether it's through a special prosecutor's office, the government has an obligation not to disclose ongoing grand jury materials. That is part of the law. It's part of federal criminal and civil procedures, and yet what seems to be happening here, far more than we've seen in the past, is a constant process of leaking information, and of course it's very selective. That's another problem here. But you're right to focus on this as we see more and more information and learn more and more about Mueller's investigation and the huge staff, of course, that he inevitably has produced here. They're looking for something, and the nature of these offices are that when you give them the power that he has and the vast scope of his jurisdiction, they're going to find something, and they're going to find it whether they do it lawfully or outside of the law. And these leaks are very, very damaging both to the individuals involved and to the process itself.
Well, yeah, and that's what appears to be happening. In fact, I'm sure it's happening because all of these reports that are coming out on a daily basis, and you can see some of them at freedomwatchusa.org, and the complaints that we filed with the Office of Professional Responsibility of the Justice Department and the Inspector General, who are supposed to investigate unethical and criminal conduct by Justice Department lawyers. In fact, Mueller is technically a Justice Department lawyer. He works under the authority of the Attorney General or the Deputy Attorney General, is that this is the type of thing that we basically have to understand in terms of investigating. And then I also went to the judges involved in the grand jury proceedings, Judge Burl Howell of the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia and the judge for Virginia, who's overseeing the 2 grand juries. So somebody's got to do it. And the fact that our Attorney General sits there twiddling his thumbs and is watching this happen is extremely, I don't know how to say it, disconcerting isn't the word. I've said that I think that Sessions should resign at this point. If he can't do his job, he's a nice man, but go be a lobbyist on K Street. Go make some money or whatever, but don't represent the American people. Do you think this needs to be investigated, Bob?
It absolutely does, and as you know as well as I do, Larry, from our work in the law over the years and our work in government, when you have leaks like this, when you have an investigation that is essentially running amok with virtually no controls on it, it not only is damaging to the case at hand and to the individuals involved, but it also sets a precedent for future investigations. They'll look back on this one and say, well, what the heck? These guys, when Mueller was doing this, leaked all sorts of stuff and engaged in abuse of power and got away with it. So, heck, we'll do the same thing later on. So it not only needs to be looked into, but it needs to be looked at from a very tough possible prosecutorial misconduct standpoint, as well as very real violations of U.S. laws, for example, as you've indicated, with regard to leaks of what should remain classified secret grand jury testimony.
Bob, let's talk about another abuse in the remaining time that we have, and that's the Bundy trial in Las Vegas. Clive and Bundy, his 2 sons are up for trial. Other defendants on October 10th of this year. It's urgent. I urge people to go to clivenbundydefensefund.org, CLIVENBUNDY, defensefund.org, to learn what's going on and contribute to the cause. But what are your basic thoughts about the government? And this is my the theory of the case, in effect. I'm not disclosing any attorney-client confidential information. Of course, I represent Cliven in a number of capacities. But let's suppose that you owe the government money, which Cliven says he does not. And I don't believe that he does in terms of who owns the land in Nevada. But does that give the government the right to assault your sister, to tase your two sons, to kick your dog and hurt him, and to kill your cattle and bury them in a mass grave, which is what happened to the Bundy family, when in fact the Bundy family and the people around them didn't harm a hair on the head of any government agent? Yet Cliven's been in prison for 1 year and 7 months. First, he was thrown in solitary confinement. Then he's kept in prison, and he's not allowed to go out. He's not a threat to anyone. He's a God-fearing man. And they're going to trial on October 10th, finally, after 1 year and 7 months. And I just want to get your take on this heavy-handedness in government, because now we see it, not just with wiretaps, but we see it in a way that looks like pre-Revolutionary War days, when King George III used to do the same thing that these government goons did to Cliven.
And they're even going further, Larry. For example, as I've read from the public accounts of the Bundy case, as well as some of the documents that have been filed in court in that case over the last year and a half, that these individuals, not just Cliven Bundy, but his sons, have been held without bond for no good reason whatsoever. The government basically had government agents posing in an undercover capacity, for example, posing as media individuals in order to infiltrate the groups of individuals who were simply there in Nevada supporting Cliven Bundy and his family and his property and his rights. No matter how or why the government didn't like Bundy, and no matter how much money they claim he owed them, they still should be forced to adhere to the Constitution of the United States of America. Not only is the government continuing to proceed in this case, when one would have thought that the Trump administration would have sort of called off the dogs and stopped this prosecution, but they've continued it with what appears to be enhanced fervor for some reason. They've had 2 sets of trials, neither of which resulted in any substantive convictions of the persons involved. They continue to hold these individuals away from their family, away from their communities, away from their property for a ridiculously long period of time, and they are faced with a judge that, by all accounts that I've seen, is among the most, if not the most, overtly pro-government judge that I've ever seen.
Well, there's a reason for that, and we've got into that in previous shows, Bob. I want to thank you for coming on, because this is this is something that's going forward. I'm, of course, involved with Cliven as one of his lawyers, and we'll be right back. Thank you, Bob.
Before he was a trial lawyer, he sliced him and diced him.
People used to ask me, Larry, what caused you to start Judicial Watch and now Freedom Watch, given the powerful forces in this country that put you at risk?
In a meat packing plant.
I'm the son of meat packers in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I know how to slice and dice.
A very special prosecutor, Larry Klayman.
If you'd like to support Freedom Watch and this radio show, go to freedomwatchusa.org.
We just heard from former Congressman Bob Barr, former U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Georgia, Bob Barr, a truly great man, my friend, a confidant. And I want to talk about what's been going on, because we know, of course, from the years of impeachment, and I've said this before, but I want to reiterate it because this is an ongoing story, that while Bill Clinton was having oral sex in the Oval Office with Monica Lewinsky, it was the American people who were getting screwed, and pardon the French. But that's exactly what's happening now, is that the Democrats, Robert Mueller, and those who hate the Trump presidency are doing everything they can to immobilize his effectiveness through these out-of-control investigations run by special counsel Robert Mueller, through the ultra-left-wing media run by CNN, MSNBC, Washington Post, New York Times, Huffington Post, and others, at a time that we face the potential for nuclear holocaust. Now, just this week, at the end of the week, the North Koreans threatened to detonate a hydrogen bomb in the Pacific. Now, what they basically were saying is we may not be ready yet to send an intercontinental ballistic missile to the United States. We'll do that when we have that opportunity. But we're going to detonate it right here in the Pacific. And by doing that, we can knock out all the power grids with an EMT type of attack, and we can radiate all of America's allies out there and really do a number on the United States. Now, this guy's a madman. You don't know what he's likely to do. What's more important to him was holding on to power, and of course we see that in the United States too in a lesser way with a lot of these politicians, than doing what's right for his country and the world. And as the president is being distracted, and the people around him, by this out-of-control, biased, prejudiced, and predetermined investigation by Special Counsel Robert Mueller, we're on the brink of a nuclear holocaust. And add that up with Iran, because if North Korea has these capabilities, since Iran, the Islamic Republic of Iran, not coincidentally, who are terrorists, it's a terrorist state, designated as a terrorist state, they're partners with North Korea. In fact, that's how North Korea survives. A lot of the money that we released in the sanctions when this agreement, this embarrassing agreement, as the president puts it, was signed by Barack Obama. And our Congress, by the way, which had a Republican Senate, did nothing to stop it. They were complicit. Where was John McCain? Where were the rest of them? Well, we now know that Iran has the same capability. If they don't have it now, they can get it within days. And they've been testing missiles as well to hit the United States, to hit Europe, and obviously to destroy Israel, because Israel's the big boogeyman. You know, interestingly enough, even though Iranians who come from a Persian culture primarily and don't consider themselves Arabs, they'll use the Arabs when they can. They still hate Israel. They're still Muslim. And they hate Jews and they hate Christians. That goes without saying. We've got these two countries. And Iran is even more sophisticated in many ways than North Korea, although their nuclear program wasn't as far along. But they are partners. They're joined at the hip. And that's why it's so important what Freedom Watch is doing. That's why our trying to bring to heel the Mueller investigation, we're just trying to get things done fairly and quickly. But when you have 17 prosecutors, highly paid prosecutors who supported Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, not just with votes, but with money. And when you have Mueller, who is the friend of James Comey and who is out for revenge against the President of the United States and who is leaking constantly to, even if he doesn't actually indict, which he will, and get convictions, which is iffy. Even if that doesn't happen, he's trying to destroy the presidency. And this is highly dangerous, much more dangerous than it was during the days of Monica Lewinsky. And Bob Barr can tell you about that, because Bob and the House impeachment manager, Dave Schippers, they wanted to go far beyond Lewinsky. They wanted to have Clinton removed from office so we get on with the business of state. Well, it's not really at that point with Trump. And they have nothing on Trump as it currently goes. But, you know, if you're going to do your job, you do it and you move on. But you don't keep the United States in a state of suspended animation and try to destroy the president before you even bring indictments. And that's what's so crucial about this. So please go to freedomwatchusa.org. We need your strong financial support. We need your strong moral support. Sign up for our emails and our information. Look at our YouTubes. Listen to this show each week. Send it around to people because it's on podcast. Educate them, because I will say things that others won't say. I'm not looking to sugarcoat anything. I'm telling you the truth. I'm your special prosecutor. I'm here for you. I'm here for the United States. I'm here for my family and your loved ones. So thank you for your support, and we'll be back next week with another edition of Special Prosecutor with Larry Klayman.